We all have heard about haunted items. We know that ghosts and demons can attach themselves to and possess things like dolls, jewelry, and furniture. However, we don't often consider more trivial or unusual items that are subject to becoming a vessel for hauntings. Children often grow attached to unusual toys, and rubber duckies are no exception. The following story explains what happens when such a thing occurs. Sophie! Sophie! Stop wriggling and let me put on your damn shoes, the little girl's mother growled. It was Christmas Eve and there was going to be a get-together at the 3-year-old's grandparents' house soon. But instead of cooperating, Sophie wanted to look at the strange white flakes falling outside the window. She had never seen such a thing before, and it was getting dark. Soon it would be too late to see the flurry of white creatures that piqued her childish curiosity. She didn't quite comprehend when or why they were leaving, so getting ready was of little importance. Sophie felt the tips of her nose and fingers growing cold as she pressed them against the frosty glass. This was just before she felt sharp dagger-like nails digging into her arm, followed by being jerked backward. Her mother was clearly upset with her over the ordeal. Was the snow a bad thing? The action was followed with harsh words that Sophie didn't quite understand, but Sophie was intelligent and familiar enough with this type of reaction from her mother to understand that she should refrain from crying. Otherwise, her mommy would get angrier. Sophie quickly forgot about the snow as her mother continued to dress her and brushed out her ratted hair in a brutish fashion. Waves of heat traveled down her spine with each careless, painful brushstroke. Tears were almost inevitable, but the torture ceased thankfully as her mother's phone began to ring. Sophie experienced a moment of joy as she was prompted to walk outside. Not only did she realize they were headed to Grandma and Grandpa's house, since she picked up on keywords within the last few minutes, especially the words bye-bye, but she also got to investigate the snow up close, which now started to cluster on the ground as they were getting into the car. She even managed to grab a handful of it from the top of the car before her mother flung her into the freezing cold car seat. She forgot temporarily about her mother's cruelty during the adventure, as riding in a car during a snowstorm can be quite mesmerizing. Sophie was all smiles as her grandparents greeted her with great big hugs and kisses. Even her mother seemed to be happy as well, which was not very often, and something seemed off about her mother's behavior. The little blonde girl was beginning to sense what artificial behavior was at such a young age. After dinner, it was time to unwrap gifts with her cousins, who were all slightly older than her. They were ravenous wolves in a mad dash after their prey. There was a flurry of wrapping paper and cardboard as her cousins rushed to open all of their presents. Sophie took the time to examine each gift as she opened them. An electronic read-along book set, a doll, a few stuffed animals, and then her favorite, a rubber ducky. It was plain old yellow, with an orange beak, and the eyes were beady and black. But Sophie got lost for a moment while staring into them. It's like she just made a best friend. Sophie carried it inside of her coat as she was loaded, gently this time, into her car seat. Leaving her grandparents' house left her heartbroken and in tears. She didn't want to go back to the lonely, dark house, especially knowing that her mother would soon be upset again. "It's okay, Sophie. We will see them again soon." This didn't comfort Sophie, and although she knew she should stop crying before it was too late, she couldn't. Her heart was hurting too much. The pain continued to well up inside of her. Sophie's mother had pulled out onto the highway when the shouting started. This certainly did not help the matter. Sophie, still clutching the rubber duck, tried to catch her breath in between sobs. Her red face became flooded with tears and mucus. Sophie's mother was becoming increasingly angry and annoyed. In a blind rage, she reached back to strike Sophie while continuing to drive at a speed unsafe for inclement weather. Simultaneously, the car started to veer sideways on the icy road. Sophie's mother whipped back around and, in a state of panic, tried to regain control of the vehicle, which only created an even worse situation. Emergency dispatch was contacted by a passerby in another vehicle. By the time they arrived, it was too late as the injuries from both Sophie and her mother were too severe. The car had smashed into a large oak tree at the bottom of a steep ravine. They pulled out Sophie's body, which was in an unrecognizable state, mangled and bloody, with a rubber ducky still firmly grasped in her hand. "Kaylee, don't wander too close to the river. You could fall in, and you still don't know how to swim," Mr. McAlvin shouted to his daughter, who was exploring several meters from their forest campsite. "How am I supposed to learn to swim if you don't give me a chance?" The little girl smirked back at her father, who was busy blocking up the tires on their RV. He reminded her that there was a time and a place to be silly, and that there were certain precautions to take during camping to ensure safety. Kaylee, being a typical 10-year-old, felt drawn to the nearby river. She sat down to throw sticks and some large stones into the water to entertain herself. Birds chirped happily in a choir up in the trees above. The sun peeking through the canopy splashed onto her back. She placed her hand, only half looking, onto the next rock to throw. Only it didn't feel like a rock, and it was oddly colored. She spun her head around back for a double take. It was a dull and yellowish color, and the rubber had become stiff after sitting in the forest for quite some time. Kaylee washed the mud off the strange object. Mr. McAlvin, alerted by the splashing of the river water, ordered his daughter to report back to ground zero. "It's a rubber ducky," she squeaked excitedly, holding the ducky out to display it as she ran up to him. This would make a nice addition to her foraging collection. Her father eyed the object for a moment. Aside from the ducky being aged and dirty, its eyes brought an unsettling feeling. He shrugged it off, thinking to himself it would be just another disgusting thing she'd tote home, and then he joked, "Great, now we have kindling for the fire." Kaylee squealed playfully and rushed around her father into the RV to look for a bottle of water and to find some soap to clean up the rubber ducky even better. Fast forward 6 months later to around Christmas time. The toy ducky, now appropriately named River Boy, has been sitting on a shelf in Kaylee's room since they arrived back to their Pennsylvania home after the weekend camping expedition. Vague, strange occurrences have been happening in the home since then. Kaylee being disturbed from sleep a few times to the sound of a young child crying, things turn up missing or misplaced, and other things of that nature. But no one in the McAlvin house really paid that close of attention to relate it to the category of paranormal, much less sourcing it to the rubber ducky. They found it odd to believe in that sort of thing, at least her father and stepmother. "It's going to snow tonight," Kaylee danced like an ecstatic chicken around the living room while watching the weather report on the 9 o'clock news on the local channel. It was Christmas Eve, and they hadn't had a white Christmas in a few years. About that time, as if on cue, snowflakes lit up by the nearby streetlight whirled past the window. Kaylee's stepmother prompted her to take a warm bath so that she could later drink hot cocoa and watch the snow fall before her 10 o'clock bedtime. Kaylee dashed to her room down the hall to gather some bedtime clothing. Her stepmother just gave her brand new, fluffy Christmas pajamas. She decided to pick a few toys to accompany her during her bath time as well. She grabbed Leggy McBear, some cat and horse figurines that you'd find at TSC, and lastly, River Boy. After running her bath and getting situated, Kaylee knocked the toys one by one into the water from the ledge of the tub, making explosion sound effects with her mouth. She splashed and played in the soothing bathwater, playing a little game called Pirates and Soldiers with her audience of toys. Leggy McBear by household rule, was never supposed to be in the bathtub, as he was a decent-sized plush teddy bear. Carrying him on the back of a sea magic pirate unicorn was proving difficult. The weight of water absorbed into his body would be, realistically, by comparison, break his back. Kaylee was lost in her imagination during that time, until she was interrupted by a strange sound coming from the overflow drain of the tub. It was the sound of a child, seemingly younger than her, crying. Kaylee couldn't believe what she was hearing. The muffled sobs continued to grow louder. Kaylee then gasped in fright as her attention was now drawn to a bright red flash in the corner of her eye. Kaylee's head snapped to the right, and there was the rubber ducky, eyes glowing and focused on her. She scrambled out of the tub, knocking the toys that sat on the ledge over onto the floor. Kaylee quickly grabbed the towel from the bar above her head as she prepared to bolt out of the bathroom. As she stepped out with one foot, it came in contact with the rubber ducky, which caused her to slip sideways, smashing her temple into the corner of an open drawer on the sink. Her life was abruptly ended. Concerned about the noise, Miss McAlvin rushed immediately to find her stepdaughter lying in a pool of her own blood, dead on the floor with the rubber ducky at her feet facing toward her. 1 year passed since the horrible incident. A young boy and his grandfather were picking up trash outside his store, which was fairly close to the McAlvin home. The town was still avidly talking about what happened. The little boy enjoyed being helpful and keeping the place tidy. Snow crunched below the little boy's shoes as he ran to pick up an object he spotted in the distance, hiding behind the dumpster. "Let's go now," the grandfather kindly prompted. "A lot more snow is headed this way tonight, and it's Christmas Eve. Grandma wants us all together at home." The boy held up the dingy yellow rubber ducky he found to show his grandpa.